everybody and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be reviewing the Quiller Porcelain palette. I'm also going to be doing a video setting up this watercolor palette, but I was going to do it all in one video and then I thought, no, just in case, you were here just for the review, maybe you weren't so much interested in seeing what colors I'm putting on the palette, then I figured I'd do that in a separate video so you wouldn't have to sit through that if all you were interested in was the review. So do be sure to stick around if you are interested in that video because it will be coming up next on this channel, so subscribe so you won't miss that. And if you haven't already, please hit that thumbs up button because it really helps out my channel and allows me to continue doing the thing that I love to do, which is making videos. Now, if you are familiar with me and you've seen any of my videos, then you probably saw that I hauled this palette earlier in the year as well as several tubes of watercolor, and that is because I originally owned this palette and I loved it and had it for many years, but after one of my recent paintings, the roses painting actually, right at the end of that painting, tragedy struck this palette and it was destroyed and it wasn't savable. I was devastated and now we're moving on. And the reason that I've waited so long to get to setting this palette up was honestly because I was very upset and heartbroken about it, and I started to get sad every time I thought about it. I'm one of those artists that become very emotionally attached to my supplies in the same way that a musician might become attached to their instrument or their violin, right? But I'm ready to move on. So the point in me telling you that I once had another one of these palettes is because we can use that experience to tell us about the quality consistency of these palettes. Does the quality match up in this palette to the one that I had before? Is it better? Who knows, right? So, quick rundown of what you can expect to see in this video. We're going to be talking about the price and availability. We're going to be talking about why you might want a porcelain palette, who I think this might be good for, do I recommend the palette, we're going to talk about the pros and the cons, and I'm going to show you some mixing on this palette, and I will show you the palette set up once I film that video. I'll come back to film the end of this video so that you can see it filled and you can see how the color lays down and how it mixes on this palette. So the first thing that I did want to mention about this watercolor palette is that it's quite heavy. It weighs about 10 pounds. So this is no lightweight. If you're a plein air artist or somebody that likes to take your supplies out with you, you'd be more inclined to purchase something like this, a watercolor sketcher box. This is going to be your studio option only. Now this does weigh about 10 pounds empty, but as you know, watercolor paint, the tubes can be quite heavy within themselves because they are minerals and pigments and sometimes heavy metals from the earth. The heavier the tube, the more pigment that's in there, right? So full, it is quite heavy, which means it's not going to rock around or move around while you're working, so you can really focus on your art. So it's an advantage in that way, but definitely keep in mind this is going to be your studio option only. So I wanted to read for you some of the information on the BLICK website. It says, this heavyweight palette doesn't slide around during use. Absolutely true. Allowing artists to focus on their craft. Its smooth porcelain surface helps to maintain paint moisture. Porcelain doesn't stain, so cleanup is a snap. It contains 32 color wells, one large mixing area, and a large plastic cover for additional mixing and storage. I would not mix on the lid, okay? That's absolutely going to stain. And it's going to beat up on there. I wouldn't mix on the lid. Great for acrylic paint as well. No. This is a watercolor palette, make no mistake, okay? So I agree with most of that information, but as you can see, not all. Now, this palette, like I said, this one's not sliding around. It's very well balanced. The original palette that I got was short on one of the corners, meaning it rocked kind of like this. And so I had to put a little bit of foam insulator tape under one of the feet so that it would lay flat. If you get a palette home like that, I would recommend that you exchange it because you're going to be irritated with it and you're not going to have a good experience with it for the entirety of the palette. I'd also like to recommend that you inspect your palette very well. You want to make sure there's no chips, there's no scratches in the surface, because the paint will lay down into those scratches and will stain badly. And those scratches or chips could destroy your good watercolor brushes, your softer ones like the Squirrel and the Sable brushes. So make sure you inspect your palette very well. This one, absolutely no problems. The last one had no problems either in terms of chips or cracks, anything like that. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that when I got this home, I made sure that I washed it very, very well before I decided to set this up. And I even went as far as to wipe it down with alcohol, particularly the lid. I noticed that there was somewhat of an oily type residue maybe left over from the manufacturing process. You want to make sure you get that off there because any kind of oils, acids, powders, anything remnants of what was used to manufacture it could interact with your paint or paper in a way that will affect the archivalness of your work and the longevity of it. You know, you might see brown spots or something on your watercolor paper 100 years from now. So you want to make sure you clean it very, very well. The last palette that I had, they did not give me enough of this foam insulator tape to go all the way around the edge of the lid. So we'll have to go ahead and see if that is the case this time. And I'm guessing likely it is. On the bottom of this palette, which I'll flip over in just a moment and show you, it has the Stephen Quiller branding on it, as well as on the lid. It is large and in charge in big black letters. Well, listen, Stephen, I really do appreciate you making this palette and designing it and everything, but this is my palette now, and I don't necessarily appreciate his name big and in charge across it. So what I will do is I'm going to put a swatch card or swatch chart across it, and I'll conveniently make sure it covers that up because I don't want to look at that for the entirety of the palette. So, like I said, while the palette itself is porcelain, the lid is plastic, and it is quite thin plastic, but pretty sturdy. I had the old one for 6 years, and while the plastic did discolor, it didn't become brittle at all, and I think that it will last probably at least maybe a decade or two, but the reality is that if you take good care of this porcelain palette, your grandkids could own it. Truly, it could last many lifetimes, but then they pair it with a plastic lid. And if I didn't mention already, I'd like to state the price. It's around $100 empty on sale. So depending on where you go, you're going to spend between $100 and $130, even $140 for this palette empty. So I was really expecting, I would have expected better quality on the lid. I don't appreciate that it's really plastic. And like I said, I would not mix on this. I would definitely use this as a dust cover only. It's important that you have a dust cover for your paints, especially if you're using paints with honey in them like the M Grams, because you don't want the dust to get into that sticky paint. So it would have been nice if they had used something like a Rubbermaid kind of lid, like, you know what I mean? That would have been nice, but perhaps I even could find one. They do have those stretchy kind of rubber lids for certain things. Now, like my brother calls it, he tells me, he sometimes very affectionately teases me and says that, you know, I'm getting a little bit crazy over this glorified dinner plate. But honestly, it really makes a big difference for me to have this, and I really do love this palette. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to apply that foam insulator tape, and I'll let you know if there's enough to go around the lid. Alright, so I am back, and I have applied the foam insulator tape to the inside of the lid. Still didn't give me quite enough, but more than last time, and I'll take that. I'll accept that, absolutely. So I'll show you the inside of the lid in just a moment, but I did want to talk for just a moment about this lid and the name on it and the swatch card that I'll be using to cover it up. So I wanted to actually measure this for you guys just so that you could get an idea of how large this signature is. This is longer than 9 inches. 9 inches. So that is quite substantial, and it's going to take quite a bit to cover that up. You know, even your average tape is usually not that large. Width-wise, you know, the widest part of the signature, you know, it's more than an inch in depth. And it's over 9 inches. So that is substantial, and maybe this really bothers you. Maybe you really don't want that. Well, too bad. You don't get to choose. So I'm going to cover that up with my swatch card here, which I've already made to mimic the palette. Now, maybe you're a really devoted artist and you know what pigments you're going to use, and you don't need a swatch card, and I really don't technically need it either, but maybe, you know, I might not paint for a couple of months with this palette and come back and I want to make sure that I know what's in here, and it's just nice to have also. So I will be filling this out in the next video when I set up the palette. Now, to go along with this as a companion piece, I have here, this is by the same brand that makes the palette, the Jackson brand, I believe. This is their porcelain flower well dish, and I think that that is such an excellent companion piece, because sometimes you want to make a nice unifying wash, or mix up a nice puddle of glaze or something. There are often times where I want to do that, and I think this is a worthy investment. This is maybe going to be between $7 and $10 or on BLICK.com, which is where I got this palette. You can also get this palette on Jerry's Artarama, and for my friends overseas, you can buy this at Jackson's as well. So, but I really find that this is a worthy investment companion piece. I think you're going to need it, unless of course you choose to leave some of the wells. Maybe you choose to leave these corner wells empty, and you can fill them with your washes sometimes. But it is nice to have, and I always have a couple of these hanging around my studio, and they last forever as long as you take care of them, and they're the same excellent quality. So like I said, I will be filling this out in the next video, but here it is along the inside of the lid, and you know, there are just a couple places where, but you know what? Close enough, and it does the job well. If you are going to be applying the foam insulator tape, which I do suggest you do, that's just one more reason why you don't want to use this to mix, because you don't want moisture around this area. You don't want the foam to grow mold or anything like that, or mildew. So, who do I think this palette is good for? Well, I think this is good for the fine artist in your life. If you're trying to do a gift, maybe for the holiday season, I think this would make a great Christmas gift. I think that really, I mean, it's for anybody who wants it, but this really is more of a luxury item for more of a professional or a fine artist, in my opinion. It's certainly not a necessity item. You can mix on a plastic palette or a metal palette, but porcelain. Porcelain really is going to lay down the smoothest. It will keep the paints more moist, and there's just, it doesn't beat up at all. There's just no comparison to how it is to mix on porcelain. Okay, so flash forward, it has now been several weeks. I'm in the middle of a painting. That's why my palette is very, very dirty. Well, it's not really dirty. These are all my mixtures that I'm using. It's a fall painting. That's the only hint that I'll give you, but do be sure to keep an eye out on my channel for the painting that will be coming up. I have 2 autumn releases this year in the form of paintings, a watercolor and an acrylic painting. But I did just want to show you real quick just how beautiful and lovely. The colors always lay down nice and flat, no beating up on the surface, and these wells, the color has been allowed to dry, of course, so if there's any contamination, I can just go ahead and wipe off that first contaminated layer, and then all the colors underneath will be nice and clean again, nice fresh color. So I do recommend you do that. Don't use the palette when the paints are still wet, because if you contaminate that yellow with a little green or a little purple or anything like that, then it's the whole well will get contaminated, and yellow is very delicate, okay? It's a fragile, delicate little paint, and it easily does get contaminated, so you definitely want to make sure you wait for the paint to set so that you lower the risk of color contamination and ruining that paint. But anyway, one of the best things about working on a porcelain palette also is that it never stains. The surface absolutely never stains, which means if you're working with colors like phthalos, quinacridones, or pyrrole colors on a metal palette or plastic palette, it will stain. But with the porcelain, it wipes perfectly clean each and every time. So, because watercolor is transparent, you're going to be able to mix nice, clean, clear mixes every single time, because you're not going to be fighting against the staining underneath your mixing area. Because the surface will always remain white, it'll make it much easier for you to gauge your colors. And that really is a big, big bonus when it comes to this palette. This palette is excellent, excellent quality. It truly, truly is. Is it worth the money? Is it worth $100? Well, that's for you to decide. In my case, obviously, being that I've purchased 2 of these palettes, I believe so. I really do love this palette, and I'm so excited to now move forward and set up the new palette, which will be the next video on this channel. Like I said, if you're interested in seeing what paints I'm going to use, what brands, what colors I like to use in my work, stick around for that video and subscribe so you won't miss it. That is my video for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching this review. If you found this video helpful, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.